My wife's best friend called me on a Tuesday. I was at my desk at work. The call came at 2:14 in the afternoon, which I know because I had a meeting at 2:30, and I was watching the clock the way you watch the clock when you want a meeting to be over before it starts. Her name on the screen, Vanessa, was not unusual in itself. She and my wife had been close since college, and she was in and out of our lives in the way of close friends. The kind of person whose calls and texts were background music rather than events. But she had never called me directly. She had texted me occasionally, group things, logistics, once when she was trying to arrange a surprise for my wife's birthday and needed to coordinate. But she had never called me at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon. I answered. She said, "Michael, I need to tell you something. I've been sitting on this for 2 years, and I can't sit on it anymore." Before I tell you the rest, subscribe, because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it will stay with you. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. Now let me tell you what Vanessa told me. My name is Michael. My wife's name is Sarah. We had been married for 9 years when Vanessa called. We had met in Denver, where we both still live, when I was 29 and she was 27, at a friend's housewarming that neither of us had particularly wanted to attend. She was standing by the bookshelf, reading the titles with the focused attention of someone who cares what people own and keep. I stood next to her and said the name of the book I would have been reading if I were her. She turned and looked at me and said, "That's the one I just finished." We talked for the rest of the party. We went to dinner the following Saturday. We have been together since. 9 years of marriage, 11 years together. A house in Washington Park that we had bought 4 years earlier and had been gradually making ours. A kitchen renovation that had taken 8 months and tested us in the specific way that shared projects test people. A backyard garden that Sarah tended with a seriousness that I found both admirable and slightly alarming. 2 jobs we were both invested in. I do financial planning, she is an architect. A life that felt, to me, known and complete. I want to tell you about what known meant before the Tuesday, because I think about it now. What I meant when I said I knew my wife, what that claim contained and what it did not. I knew her professionally in the way of a partner who has tracked another person's career for 11 years. I knew which projects lit her up and which drained her. I knew the specific quality of the distraction she brought home from a difficult client day versus a productive one. I knew that she was better in the morning than at night for hard conversations, that she needed an hour of quiet when she came in from site visits, that her confidence in her own work was more fragile than it appeared to anyone watching her. I knew her personally in the way of 11 years of proximity. I knew what she ate when she was stressed and what she could not eat when she was sad. I knew her relationship with her mother, which was complicated in the way of relationships with mothers who were not quite available, who required you to come to them in specific configurations, rather than the configurations you actually had. I knew her friendship with Vanessa and the particular relief that Vanessa produced in her, the specific ease of being with someone who had known you before you had to be anything. I thought I knew her completely. The Tuesday showed me that complete was the wrong word. Complete implies a closed system. What I had actually known was a very large, very specific portion of a person. The portion she had given me and the portion I had been able to see. The affair was in the portion she had not given me. The 2 years of silence after was in the same portion. That is not an accusation. People are not fully knowable. I understand this. But there is a particular quality of intimacy in marriage that implies access. Not total access, not every corner of another person, but access to the hard things, the things that happen that change you, the things that need to be said. I had believed I had that access. The Tuesday showed me I had believed wrong. I sat in my office for 2 hours after the call and thought about what it meant to have been wrong about that. I want to tell you about Vanessa before I continue because she is part of this story in a specific way, and it would be wrong to reduce her to the phone call. Vanessa and Sarah had been friends since their sophomore year at the University of Colorado Boulder. The kind of friendship that forms in college and survives everything. The different cities, the different life stages, the years when you talk less often, and then the years when you talk every day, and somehow it is as if no time has passed. Vanessa had been at our wedding. She had been the person Sarah called from the hospital when her mother was sick 2 years before the affair, before I knew that timeline contained an affair. She was, in the specific vocabulary of Sarah's life, one of the essential people. She had carried this for 2 years. I thought about that in the hours after she called. The specific weight of knowing something like this about someone you love and having to decide every day what to do with the knowing. The promotion party had been the event that made the decision for her. Watching me toast Sarah, proud and uninformed, had made the silence feel like participation. I understood that. Even then, in the hours when I was most raw, I understood it. She said, "It happened about 2.5 years ago. It lasted for about 6 months. She ended it in March 2 years ago. It has been over since then." I said, "What are you telling me?" She said, "Sarah had an affair. I knew about it. I have known about it for 2 years. And I cannot keep being the person who knows this and says nothing to you." The 2:30 meeting was going to have to wait. I said, "Who?" She said, "A colleague, someone she worked with on a project. He moved to Seattle after it ended. I don't think you know him." I said, "Does she know you're calling me?" She said, "No." I said, "Why now?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Because she got promoted last month and there was a party, and I watched you toast her and talk about how proud you were, and She stopped. "I could not keep sitting next to you at parties while you did not know. It started to feel like I was doing something to you. Not just keeping a secret, actually doing something." I said, "Okay." She said, "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry this is how you're finding out." I said, "I need to go." She said, "I know." I hung up. I sat at my desk and I looked at the wall of my office, which has a photograph of the mountains I took the summer Sarah and I hiked the Maroon Bells, and a whiteboard covered in client projections, and a framed print that Sarah had given me for my 40th birthday. I looked at these objects and I thought about the thing I had just been told. My meeting started without me. My assistant knocked on the door at 2:35 and said the clients were waiting, and I said, "Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I had an emergency. Reschedule." I sat at my desk for 2 hours. I want to tell you what I thought about in those 2 hours because it is not what you might expect. I thought about the specific 6 months that Vanessa had named, 2.5 years ago. I ran back through what I knew about that period, and I thought about Sarah during it, who she had been, what she had seemed like, what had been different, and what had been the same. I am a financial planner. My entire professional life is built on pattern recognition, on identifying the signal inside the noise, on seeing what the numbers are actually saying rather than what they appear to be saying. I applied this to the 6 months. What I found, sitting at my desk for 2 hours, was that there had been signals. Not conclusive ones, I had not had the context to read them as signals at the time, but things I had noticed and attributed elsewhere. A period when she had seemed distracted in a way I had put down to a difficult project. An argument we had in September of that year that had seemed disproportionate to its cause, and that had lingered in a way our arguments did not usually linger. A month when she had come home late several nights a week, which I had accepted as the project explanation and not examined. I had not examined it, because I had not thought there was anything to examine. I drove home at 4:30. Sarah would not be home until 6. She had a site visit that afternoon. I had 90 minutes in the house alone, which I had not consciously planned, but which felt, once I was in it, like a gift. I sat in the kitchen, our kitchen, the one we had renovated together, the 8 months of decisions and arguments, and the specific satisfaction at the end of a space that felt completely ours. I sat at the counter and I thought about 11 years and what I knew about my wife and what I did not know, and what the difference between those categories meant. Sarah came home at 6:15. She came in the door the way she always comes in from a site visit, slightly disheveled, carrying something, talking before she has fully arrived, the energized distraction of someone whose mind is still on the thing they just left. She said, "Sorry I'm late. The site was a disaster. The contractor—" She stopped. She looked at my face. She said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Close the door. Sit down." She sat down. She looked at me with the specific attention of someone who has registered that something large is about to happen and is trying to prepare. I said, "Vanessa called me today." Her face changed. Not dramatically. Sarah does not change dramatically. A small, precise alteration, the compression of something that had been held open for 2 years, suddenly closing. She said, "Michael." I said, "I need you to tell me, not Vanessa's version, yours." She told me. It was, in its shape, what Vanessa had said. A colleague, a project, 6 months, ended 2 years ago. In the specific details, it was worse than what Vanessa had told me, because specific details are always worse than summaries, and because hearing it from Sarah meant hearing the part that Vanessa could not have told me, what Sarah had been thinking, what she had told herself, what the experience had been. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Why didn't you tell me when it ended?" She said, "Because I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought if I told you it would end the marriage. And I told myself that if it was over, the damage was limited, that what you didn't know couldn't hurt you." I said, "That's not what that phrase means." She said, "I know." I said, "What you didn't know was hurting me. It was changing me without my consent. Every conversation we had, every decision we made, every time I talked about how proud I was of you, I was doing all of that without the full picture. That's the damage, not just the affair, the 2 years after." She was quiet. She said, "I know. I have known for 2 years." I said, "Then why didn't you tell me?" She looked at me with the expression she has when she is going to say something true that she does not want to say. She said, "Because I was a coward. Because I did not want to see your face look the way it looks right now. Because every day I didn't tell you was a day the marriage was still intact, and I chose the intact day over the honest one." I said, "For 2 years." She said, "For 2 years." I looked at my wife across the kitchen counter in the kitchen we had built together, and I thought about 9 years and 11, and the bookshelf at the party, and the maroon bells, and the specific way she had said, "That's the one I just finished." I said, I need to think. She said, I know. I said, I need you to give me space to think. Not tomorrow. I need days. I don't know how many. She said, okay. I said, I need you to understand that I don't know yet what I'm going to decide. She said, I know. I said, and I need you to know that the 2 years is its own thing, separate from the 6 months. I need you to understand that. She said, I do. I have lived with it for 2 years. I understand exactly what it is. I said, okay. She went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen. I want to tell you about the thinking because it is part of the story and it is not always told. I took 3 days off work. I told my assistant it was a family situation, which was true in the way that the most precise truths are also the most opaque. I went for long runs in Washington Park. I am a runner, have been for 15 years, and running is where I do my clearest thinking, the physical motion producing a mental stillness that I cannot achieve sitting down. I ran the same loop every day, and I thought about the same things each time and came back to the same questions. The questions were not, should I stay or should I leave? Not yet. Those were the end of the thinking, not the beginning. The questions were, who is she? What is this marriage? What do I actually know about either of those things now that I know what I did not know before? I am a financial planner. I deal in information. I build plans based on the most complete picture of a situation that can be assembled. When new information arrives that changes the picture, you don't throw out the plan, you update it. You incorporate the new information. You revise. That is a professional framework, and I am aware that people are not portfolios and that marriages are not financial plans, and that the revision of a marriage is not accomplished by updating a spreadsheet. I know this. But the habit of thinking, the willingness to look at new information rather than away from it, to ask what the information means rather than what I want it to mean, that was useful. What I concluded after 3 days of running and thinking was this. I knew my wife. I had known her for 11 years, and the 6 months were inside those 11 years, and the 2 years of silence were also inside them. All of it was her. The woman at the bookshelf, and the woman who had ended the affair, and the woman who had chosen 2 years of silence over one honest conversation. That was the same person. I had to decide what to do with all of her, not just the parts I already knew. I called Vanessa on the 3rd day. She answered immediately. She said, "How are you?" I said, "I've been better. I need to ask you something." She said, "Okay." I said, "Did she know who she was when she ended it? Or was she waiting for it to end the way she waited for you to call me, for someone else to make the hard move?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. She said, "She ended it. That part was her. She called him and she ended it, and she told me the next day, and she cried for 3 hours in my apartment." I said, "Why did she end it?" She said she looked at herself and didn't recognize who she was. She said she thought about you and she couldn't keep going. I sat with that. I said, "Thank you, Vanessa." She said, "Michael, I want to say something. I should have called you 2 years ago. I know that." I told myself I was protecting the marriage by staying quiet, but I was protecting myself from a hard conversation and calling it something else. "I'm sorry." I said, "I know. I appreciate you calling now." She said, "Is there anything I can do?" I said, "Just be honest with me if I have questions." She said, "Always." I called Sarah that evening. She answered on the first ring. She had been waiting. I said, I want to have dinner, not at home, somewhere neither of us has been, neutral ground. We met at a restaurant in Capitol Hill that we had never gone to together. We sat across from each other at a table by the window, and we ordered, and we were quiet for a while in the particular silence of two people who have very large things to say and are trying to find the right door into them. Then I said, Tell me why you ended it. She looked at me. She said, Because I thought about you, specifically. I thought about you the morning after, and I thought, I do not recognize what I'm doing. And I thought about all the reasons I had told myself it was okay, or complicated, or justifiable, and I thought, none of that is true. And I ended it. I said, You could have told me then. She said, I know. I said, Why didn't you? She said, I was afraid of your face looking like it looked on Tuesday. I said, It was always going to look like this. 2 years didn't prevent this face. 2 years just delayed it. She said, I know that now. I said, Did you know it then? She looked out the window. She said, I think I knew it. I chose not to know it. We ate dinner. We talked about what had happened and about what we were going to do with it. Not in terms of the marriage, not yet. That conversation required more time and more honesty than one dinner could hold. But we talked about what we each needed. She needed to stop carrying the secret, which she had been carrying for 2 years, and which had shaped her in ways I was only beginning to understand. I needed time and information, and the specific thing I had never had in 11 years with her, which was the knowledge that she could look at something she had done wrong and say it plainly. She could. She did. That mattered. We went to therapy. 3 months of weekly sessions with a therapist named Dr. Rita Sandoval, who works in Cherry Creek and who has the specific quality of even-handedness, of holding both of us accountable for specific things. Mine, the inclination to analyze rather than feel. Hers, the pattern of silence over honesty, that made the sessions productive rather than just painful. There was a session, about 6 weeks in, where Dr. Sandoval asked me, what would it mean to trust her again? I said, I don't know if I can define it. She said, try. I said, it would mean believing that if something like this were happening, if she were in trouble, if she were struggling, if she were being pulled towards something wrong, she would come to me. Before, not after. Dr. Sandoval looked at Sarah. Sarah said, I don't know if I know how to do that. Dr. Sandoval said, why not? Sarah said, because I was raised to handle things alone, to not burden people with problems that felt like they were mine to manage. My mother, she stopped. My mother could not be burdened. There was a version of her that was available and a version that was not. And you learned very quickly not to bring problems that would activate the unavailable version. I looked at my wife. I had known this about her mother in the general way. I had not understood its specific shape until that moment. I said, am I my mother-in-law to you? Is that what I've been? She said, no, but the reflex is older than you are. It predates you. It was there before I knew how available you actually were. I said, I need you to know that I am available. For the hard things. For the things that might change how I look at you. I need you to know that that is what I signed up for. She said, I'm learning that. I said, you should have always known it. She said, I know. I'm learning it now. That session changed something. Not everything. There was a great deal of work left after it, and there are things between us that are not resolved and may never be fully resolved. But it was the session where I understood what the affair had actually been about, which was not the man in Seattle, or the project, or the 6 months. It had been about a woman who did not yet know how to bring her hardest self to the person who loved her most. I want to say something here that I want to be careful about. Understanding what something was about is not the same as excusing it. I understood after that session the specific history that had produced Sarah's silence. The mother, the reflex, the deeply ingrained habit of handling things alone that predated me by decades. I understood all of that. It did not make what she had done right. It did not discharge the debt. What it did was make the person who owed the debt legible to me in a way she had not been before. That legibility was what I needed. Not to forgive. I do not use that word easily, and I do not think forgiveness is something that arrives all at once. But to continue. To decide that the person in front of me was a person I understood well enough to choose to keep knowing. I chose to keep knowing her. The 16 months since Vanessa's call have been, in parts, the hardest of my adult life. There have been nights when I lay awake running the timeline in my head, which months, which events, what I had been doing and thinking and saying, while the 6 months were happening beside me without my knowledge. There have been moments in therapy when I said things I had not known I thought until I heard myself say them. There have been Saturday mornings that were just Saturday mornings and that felt, in their ordinariness, like a kind of proof that the ordinary was still available, that it had not been permanently canceled by what I had learned. The ordinary has not been canceled. It is still here. It contains what happened, and it is larger than what happened, and every Saturday morning that passes is another Saturday morning added to the weight of it. Sarah and I are still in the house in Washington Park. The garden she tends has had a good summer. The tomatoes came in well, which she told me with the specific satisfaction of someone who planted seeds in April, not knowing if they would produce anything, and who now had evidence that they had. I want to tell you about Vanessa. Not just the call, the months after. She and Sarah went through a period of distance that I was peripherally aware of and did not ask about directly, because it felt like their territory to navigate. About 4 months after the call, Sarah told me that she and Vanessa had talked. A long, difficult conversation that she did not give me the full details of. What she told me was this. Vanessa had said that keeping the secret for 2 years had cost her something she had not anticipated. That the act of knowing and saying nothing had changed how she saw herself in the friendship, and that she had called me not only because of the promotion party, but because she had realized she was losing herself inside the silence. I thought about that for a long time. The idea that keeping someone else's secret can damage the keeper as much as the kept from. That silence is not neutral. Sarah and Vanessa are still close. They had dinner 2 weeks ago. Sarah came home quieter than usual, in the way she sometimes is after conversations that have required something from her. She said, "Vanessa asked how we were doing." I said, "What did you tell her?" She said, "I told her we were doing the work." I said, "That's accurate." She said she was glad she called. I said, "So am I." She looked at me. She said, "Even now? Still?" I said, "Even now. Still." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because the version of this marriage where I didn't know was a version I was living in without consent. Whatever this version is, whatever it costs, it's mine. I'm choosing it with full information." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to tell you something I've been thinking about." I said, "Okay." She said, "I think I was waiting For 2 years, some part of me was waiting for someone to find out. Not planning it, but I think the secret had become too heavy, and I didn't know how to put it down, and I was waiting, without knowing I was waiting, for something to force the conversation. I said, and the promotion party was that something. She said, for Vanessa, yes. Not for me. I didn't engineer it, but I think I had stopped doing the work of keeping it hidden. I was becoming careless in ways I didn't notice. I said, why didn't you just tell me? Why wait for something to force it? She looked at me with the expression she has when she is going to say something that will cost her. She said, because I was afraid that telling you would be the end, and I was afraid that not telling you would also eventually be the end. And I chose the version of not telling where I could tell myself it might not be, right up until I couldn't tell myself that anymore. I said, that's the most honest thing you've said to me about it. She said, I know. I'm sorry it took this long. I said, me too. We sat at the kitchen table for a while after that. The Denver night outside the window was doing what Denver nights do in the fall, clear and cool and very dark, the mountains invisible but present, which is the specific quality of living in a city where you always know where the mountains are, even when you cannot see them. I thought about 11 years, about all the conversations we had had at that table and all the ones we had not had, about the ones we were now capable of having that we had not been capable of before. There is a Saturday morning I want to describe, 3 months ago, the kind of Denver morning that exists only in August, when the mountains are very clear to the west and the air has not yet heated up and everything feels like a promise that the day is going to keep. We were in the backyard. She was doing something with the tomatoes, staking them, I think, or pruning, the specific garden work that I observe but do not participate in because we have learned, over the years, that there are some things she does better alone, and that my involvement produces more friction than assistance. I was reading. The Saturday paper, the physical version, which I maintain as a habit even though David, our neighbor, mocks me for it regularly. She looked up from the tomatoes and she said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you ever wish Vanessa hadn't called?" I put down the paper. I said, "No." She said, "Not for a second?" I said, "Not for a second." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because I have been living in this marriage for 11 years. All of it. The parts I knew and the parts I didn't. I want to live in the actual marriage, not the edited version." She was quiet. I said, "Do you wish she hadn't called?" She thought about it honestly. The honest thinking, the pause before the answer, was something therapy had given her, or given back to her. She said, "No. I think I needed someone else to do it because I couldn't do it myself. And I needed to face the consequences because they were the real thing, and I had been avoiding the real thing." I said, "That's honest." She said, "I'm working on that." I said, "I know." I want to tell you something about what I know now that I did not know the Tuesday before Vanessa called. I know that trust is rebuilt differently than it is first built. The first trust, the trust of the early years, the trust of the party and the dinners and the slow accumulation of a shared life, that trust is largely passive. It forms from the absence of evidence against it. You trust because nothing has told you not to. It is easy trust, light. The trust I am building now is a different kind. It is made from specific things, specific conversations, specific honesty, the specific act of my wife saying the most honest thing she has said to me about it and not looking away. It is heavier than the first trust. It requires more maintenance. And it is, I have come to believe this even when the believing is hard, more real. I know that a marriage you understand is not the same as a marriage you endorse. I understand why Sarah did what she did. I understand the history that produced the silence. I do not endorse either thing. Understanding is not approval. But understanding is what made it possible to stay and keep working rather than treating the marriage as something irreparably broken. I know that the person who called me, Vanessa, did something I was not certain I would have been able to do. She sat with something for 2 years that was not hers to carry, and then she put it down in the only way she could, which was to give it to the person it actually belonged to. I am grateful to her for that. I have told her so. She said, "I'm sorry I waited so long." I said, "You called when you could. That was enough." I know, finally, that the marriage I have now is not a lesser version of the marriage I thought I had. It is a truer one. More expensive, more effortful, requiring things of both of us that the easy years did not require. But built on what is actually there between two people who have looked at the worst of things and decided to keep looking at each other. She went back to the tomatoes. I went back to the paper. The August morning continued, ordinary in the way that the best mornings are ordinary. Nothing required of them except to be there, to be warm, to let the mountains be visible and the garden keep growing. I thought, this is the marriage I am in, the one where I know everything I know, and she is the person who told me, the fully informed version, the one built on what is actually true. I would not trade it. That is the story I am keeping.